Welcome to the World on Fire podcast, where we talk all things World War II. I'm your host, Nick Schweitzer. In our new series, we're going to be discussing one of the most important and really under talked about campaigns of the entire war, and that is that of the North African campaign. More importantly, the question will be raised, why was Africa important in the first place? And what did it lead to? How did it change the landscape of the war? And as we know, the North African campaign is taking place when the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor drags the United States into the war. Up until the final few months, this is a British-led and fought campaign that was vitally important, as we will learn. Without further ado, let's talk about this week's subject. To put it in place, it's July of 1940, and by now the Battle of France is over. The historically prowess that is that of the French has fallen in just over 6 weeks to Nazi Germany. In the previous month, the armistice at Campagny is signed, placing the Vichy government in control of all of the non-occupied French areas. The French would, however, their main government would go into exile into England. The French would also have a lot of resistance within the country. While the Vichy did, in fact, rule in place of, obviously, Nazi Germany couldn't be there to rule France. However, the French would ultimately take it back. Anyway, Nazi Germany now has control of basically a majority of mainland Europe. And to continue its war machine, Adolf Hitler now needs to set his sights on the breadbasket of the world's natural resources. Just south of Europe, across the Mediterranean Sea, lays the shores of North Africa, predominantly made up of British and French colonies such as Egypt, Algeria, and Morocco. The Italians also had a share of the North African pie, Libya. And as the race for resources continued, Adolf Hitler now realized he did not need to go to North Africa and make a foothold. He already had one. Now, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, who had recently ordered the buildup of the 10th Army on the Libyan-Egyptian border, ordered the 10th to invade the British-controlled Egypt. That did not happen. They did directly ignore this order. They did not actually invade Egypt. Even though he was the dictator, even though Mussolini was the dictator, the military leaders didn't really hold him in the highest of light. However, 2 days later, on August 10th, Mussolini then went to Italian Marshal Rodolfo Ranzani, and that he was to launch the invasion of Egypt in sequence with Nazi Germany's invasion plan of Great Britain, Operation Sea Lion. So, in a way, Mussolini stepped down, or I would not step down. He bowed down to ultimately his military. So he was like, well, okay, well, we're still going to get it done, but we'll do it later. We're going to do it. We're going to line it up with the Germans. Instead of pushing back and being like, no, I gave you an order. We're going to do it. He balked. It is a good way to put at it. So Operation Sea Lion, for those of you who don't know, was Nazi Germany's mainland invasion plan of the United Kingdom, Great Britain. However, obviously, we know that never happened. The Battle of Britain was to take place right before it, which was covered a little bit in our most recent series. It was an air mission that was a last-ditch effort by the British to protect their homeland before the mainland invasion. It worked. The Royal Air Force, who had a minuscule force compared to the Luftwaffe at the time, basically pulled a rabbit out of the hat. They provided a miracle and it secured that the Germans would need to scrap Operation Sea Lion. On the other side, awaiting the Italian attackers would be British General Archibald Wavell, an incredibly decorated soldier and a veteran officer of the First World War. Even though the entire month of August and leading into September, the Italians simply were not prepared for an all-out offensive on their own. Not only did they have a lack of resources themselves, but their fighters were vastly inexperienced and undertrained compared to their German allies, who you must remember were invading everybody at this point. They were a well-seasoned military. Yet, even with these crucial war-fighting elements missing, on September 8th, Graziani gives the order that the invasion of Egypt will take place the following morning. The first week of the invasion would see very little success, and they would only move roughly 10 miles through harassing fire from Wavell's artillery and his 7th Armored Division. Even worse, once they made it close to the city of Makatila, their slow advance was completely halted once they ran into fuel and oil supply issues. Instead of retreating and chalking the invasion up as a failure, Graziani ordered encampments to be built around the nearby city of Sidi Barini. Now, realizing that their enemy are in a vulnerable spot, Wavell pieces together 36,000 men in order to execute Operation Compass. The operation's objective would be simply to take each of these new encampments out one by one. On December 9th, the first forward element encampment would be attacked and taken. By the end of January, all of the encampments would share the same fate. The Italians were now in a full retreat back to Al-Ghila. Now, I want to bring up, there's going to probably be some cities that I'm going to not say correctly. Please don't kill me for it. Some I'm going to get right, some I'm not going to get right. The North African campaign was not necessarily my specialty. However, it's obviously my own fault. I should probably freshen up on that before I try to speak about it right. Anyway, Al-Ghila. Oh, that sounds right. Libya, my bad. When Wavell recognized an opportunity to completely cut off the Italians' retreat. In less than 90 minutes, the 7th Armored Division was able to race across the desert and set up in the city of Betafam, where they would meet the Italians head on. For the Italians, what they had simply wasn't enough. Outgunned, outran, and outsupplied, the British absolutely destroyed the Italian 10th Army. It was now clear at this point that there was no way possible the Italians could single-handedly fight the Allies. Mussolini, in turn, asked Hitler for some aid in the North African campaign, and it would set the war on a course for a cataclysmic fight and would shed a light into what would come next in Europe. One key point I would like to make here is that the Nazis did not have something in place. They didn't have anything pieced together. They didn't, hey, what happened? They were not looking to take the fight to the British somewhere else, and especially in the position of being an aid to the Italians. And with that being said, it's also a great opportunity to talk about the state of allyship in the war. The Axis powers do not officially align under the Tripartite Pact until September 27th, 1940. Now, the German and the Italians have been close with each other in the sense of international relations, but that's more of a thanks that they are both fascist countries ruling as neighbors. If you've ever done any research on Adolf Hitler and how it's a good way to put it. He was the almighty when it came to, it was always whatever he had to offer you was better. He needed more from you in order for it to be equal. And he basically directed, if you will, every meeting that he had with his allies. It was his way or the highway, and it was 90% of him talking, yelling, fanatically, what have you. However, in the sense of the Western allies, if you will, had held conferences. Their militaries worked together a lot. It was a very shared relationship, allyship, if you will. The Axis really didn't work that way. And we'll get into that in some later series when we dive into the inner workings of the OKW. But just know that for Adolf Hitler and how he viewed being an ally, for him, he was top dog. Anyway, like I said, being an ally, and a key part of being an ally is having something you can offer, but you will only offer in return for something else that will help you compete or complete the fight that you're wanting to fight. It'll help you reach your objective in completing the fight that you're currently fighting and your war that you're having. Because you must remember, it's not like everybody joins up, right? Oh, we're all collectively, yes. The British, the Americans, the Canadians, not everybody shared the same. The United States didn't share the same feelings that they were being physically threatened at the front door by the Nazis. You're all, however, which we're going to find out later, you need friends in a fight. Right? We've always heard the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's exactly what allyship is. Anyway, for Germany, their objective is to not help Italy. Their objective is to gain resources needed to beat the British. Now, they have an opportunity for both. The Nazi High Command hastily puts together the Afrika Korps, placed under the command of infamous General Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. Hitler's orders to Rommel were simple: do not engage the enemy directly and back the Italians up. He did not want the Germans doing the bulk of the fighting in North Africa. On February 14, 1941, repositioned troops from Greece, along with Erwin Rommel, who actually arrived 2 days earlier, arrive in Libya as a direct support to the Italians. Now, upon arrival, they were like, okay, well, we're gonna stay at the docks and we'll unload in the morning, and then you guys can. And Rommel said, that's not how this is gonna work. And he wasted zero time. And under the cover of darkness, he quickly unloaded all of his men, all of his supplies, and immediately put them on a pace towards the front. The famed German commander was not simply going to just sit back and wait. Now, even though the British had decimated the Italian 10th, once they made it across to Srinacia, they were exhausted. Wavell saw that his men were no longer able to fight and ordered the 7th Armored back to Egypt in order to rearm and reman themselves. The 7th was hastily replaced with the inexperienced desert fighters as the 2nd Armored Division. Wavell's objective was to place fortified fighting positions in and around the city of Tobruk. The Germans are well on their way to the unsuspecting British defenders. On the 25th, or February 25th, 2 weeks after their arrival, the Germans launched a surprise attack on British troops near El Aquila. And they will end up launching their full assault a month later on March 24th, taking the city completely in just 6 days. This is Operation Sonnenblume, or Sunflower, and it was now moving ahead at full steam. Rommel planned on erasing every gain the British and Australian troops had made into Libya. It was at the Battle of El Aquila where the surviving members of the Australian 9th Infantry Division would fall back to the port of Tobruk, holding up as insurgents. On the 25th of March, Graziani is sacked and replaced by General Italo Garibaldi. This would be something that was to the benefit of Rommel. And by the second week of April, the British are completely pushed out of Libya and back to Egypt, leaving the besieged garrison at Tobruk. Now, the Rommel and the Italians had pushed the British and the Australians back to Egypt. The Axis would once again go on the offensive. The rugged terrain of the Libyan and Egyptian border left one small natural escarpment through the Haifa Pass. Leading as the only pass west into Libya, Rommel knew that it was vital to take the pass in order to stop any opposition from making another successful counteroffensive. On April 14th, Rommel secures the city of Sollum and now occupies the Haifa Pass. While there are many skirmishes that break out in order for the Allies to take back the pass and to get back to Tobruk, the German defense proves to just be too strong. Now, there are three major military operations that take place from this point forward. I'm not going to go way into detail on all of them. That's insane, and we'd be here all day. But I'm just going to kind of briefly go over them, right? The first one was Operation Brevity. It took place on May 15th. And then it was 3 infantry battalions and 53 tanks, and they're defeated by Erwin Rommel's counteroffensive. June 15th, right, a month later, 25,000 men and over 200 Allied aircraft go head-to-head with the 8th and the 5th Panzer Regiments. This battle gives the Haifa Pass its infamous Hellfire Pass nickname due to the immense amount of tank and artillery fire. Now, this battle took some time to recover from. Then on the 18th of November, Operation Crusader began with 118,000 men, and they were finally successful in taking the pass and driving Rommel back to El Agheila. And thousands of Italians and Germans would surrender at the Haifa garrison in January of 1942. Right, so we're talking about these guys started this on May 15th, 1941, and they finally took it back in January of 1942. So after nearly basically a year of fighting, the front lines were almost identical to what they began, in the same exact city of El Agheila. Now, both sides are completely exhausted and undermanned by this point, and the amount of lives and resources it has cost both of them is immense. Yet nobody can really afford to take a break. The Germans are to succeed in their hunt for resources. They absolutely have to take Tobruk back, and they need to take it back right now. In early May, the Panzer Army Africa reships and prepares to take over the city of Tobruk from the western side. And on the 26th of May, Rommel and his troops clashed with the British 8th Army, led by British General Claude Auchinleck in the city of Gazala. While initially making a decoy attack in the north, while the main force flanked, Rommel and his men were backed into a free French minefield and quickly needed to play defense while they created a route through the field. The same exact time, Auchinleck launched Operation Aberdeen, which was to knock out the Panzer Army in their vulnerable state. However, the plan was poorly put together, and it was bad. How quickly they put it together and how quickly they moved things did not happen the way they were supposed to, and because of that, it put the British in a more vulnerable state that the Germans were in. And seeing that, Rommel immediately counterattacked and smashed the British in Tobruk. We needed to make a real quick pause before we go on to the conclusion of the episode, just to remind everyone of the British and German relationship during the war up to this point. And from May to the beginning week of June of 1940, the British were fighting alongside the last leg of the French army, where they would literally be pushed off the continent at the port of Dunkirk. A month later, the Luftwaffe would absolutely hammer London and her metropolitan area to prepare the invasion of England. As we stated earlier, that didn't happen. And in May of 1941, over 22,000 elite German soldiers from the Fallschirmjägers, that's a real fancy term for airborne unit, landed in Greece, attempting to push the New Zealand, Australian, and British troops out of the Mediterranean for good. And it took them 13 days to succeed there. So in less than 1 year, the largest empire in the world, with one of the greatest military pedigrees in human history, would be knocked out of Europe and the Mediterranean, and they'd also have their largest city bombed to dust. And now it looks like the same exact thing might be happening in North Africa. After their defeat at Tobruk, the British were on the run back across the border into Egypt. Once again, exhausted armies would race across the border to set up their next defensive perimeters, known as the Matruth Line. Defending this line would be different soldiers from the Commonwealth to include Indian, New Zealand troops. However, on June 25th, General Auchinleck became the direct commander of the 8th Army, and he chose not to make the city of Mersa Matruth the main city that would be defended. He felt it was too vulnerable. So he was desperate to find a position that would not allow the Germans an opportunity to outmaneuver them again as they had done in Gazala. 40 miles to the north, near the impassable Quatara Depression in the city of Alamein. While the Battle of Mersa Matruth would crush the Commonwealth defenders, British General William Norrie began the construction of defenses at Alamein. The British HQ in Cairo was in complete panic due to the desperate situation for them in Egypt. Would there really be another Crete, or worse, Dunkirk? Would they really be beaten again? The British would be damned if they were going to lose another inch of ground. On the 30th of June, Rommel and his panzer army approached Alamein, exhausted. While they made incredible speed across the desert, Rommel's unrelenting push had cost his men countless hours of much-needed rest. And instead of taking the recommended 6-week rest after taking the city of Tobruk, Rommel chose to push straight through, proving to be a fatal mistake. The stage is now set for the Battle of Alamein, which would take the lives of nearly 20,000 men. The Battle of Alamein would prove to be one of the most important battles of World War II. Even more so, there would be two of them closely back to back. One thing that we did not bring up once during this episode was during this time the United States would be attacked by the Empire of Japan. We did kind of state it in the beginning, but we didn't talk about it. Honestly, there was no need to bring it up at that point, and we'll discuss why in the next episode. However, they'd be attacked by the Empire of Japan, and Germany would declare war on them just a few days later. And the United States would get their very first taste of ground fighting against the Germans in North Africa. And it would give American and British troops the opportunity to integrate and work together on their allyship, what we were talking about earlier as well. So in our next episode, we're going to be discussing the First and the Second Battle of Alamein, the United States' involvement in the North African campaign, Operation Torch, and the eventual setup for the Tunisian campaign. As always, thank you so much for listening. We're quickly approaching the 750 play mark. That's awesome considering, we're not even into 10 episodes yet. So I seriously can't thank you all enough. Please make sure that you leave a like and a review. It helps us grow even more so and expand our audience. Check out and follow our social media by searching World on Fire, History of the Second World War podcast on all platforms. And I want to stop because I'm going to break the norms. Please don't turn it off yet. This is a great opportunity to bring up a phenomenal mission that I have started with Arizona State University. Collectively, we have created a fund specifically for their students in the World War II Master's Program. The World War II Studies Student Support Fund is a way for us to continue and teach the next generation of scholars while easing the financial burden. This is an incredible program that I myself am a graduate of, and I highly encourage anyone to donate to it. The link for this fund and its donation will be in the show notes. And that's it for right now. So, as always, thank you guys so much, and I will see you all in 2 weeks.